And thank you everyone for coming. We have rather more interest in our press conference than some years, so there may be some newcomers or people unfamiliar with the work of the General Synod. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction to the Synod's work and to the business the Synod will be doing at the forthcoming group of sessions from February the 6th to the 9th. I do realise, of course, that most of you will be most interested to hear from Bishop Sarah and the Archbishops about the Bishop's response to living in love and faith, so I do promise to be very brief before handing over to them to deal with that part of the agenda. The General Synod is the Church of England's national legislative and deliberative body.
Let me now turn our attention to LLF. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the Bishop of London, Sarah Mullally, to talk about LLF.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thank you for coming. It's good to be with you, and also those online. We're glad that you could join us. As Mark said, my name is Sarah Mullally, and I've chaired the Next Steps group over the last 2.5 years. The Next Steps group is made up of bishops from the Church of England, and we've been steering this process. But in doing that, we have been accompanied by a reference group, which are people with diverse lived experiences and convictions. Back in 2017, the Archbishops, the House and the House of Bishops commissioned a major study of human identity, sexuality, relationships and marriage in the context of the Christian faith, changes in society and the disagreements within not just the wider church, but the Church of England. The result was a suite of teaching and learning resource, which was published in November 2020 under the banner of Living in Love and Faith. And I'm very pleased to see that the Archbishop of Canterbury's copy is very well thumbed. The teaching and learning resources were designed to be accessible. They included not just the book, but also a video-based course. There were films and there were podcasts. They told stories of individual couples and families with diverse lived experiences and convictions about sexuality, identity and relationships. During 2021 and 2022, the bishops encouraged church communities around the country to use the resources to learn together, to listen to one another and also to God. Thousands of people took part. In fact, over 6,000 people responded to a questionnaire about the experience of learning together. Many sent poems and artwork in response to the topics that they explored. This was the first church-wide process of this type in the Church of England. We, the bishops, also played our part in Living in Love and Faith. We were involved in drafting the book. We encouraged people in our diocese to take part in the LLF course, and we engaged with the resources ourselves, alongside studying scripture and reflecting on the church's tradition. We then listened to what people said, the things that they said about the matters in living in love and faith and the issues that raised. Towards the end of last year and earlier this week, the bishops have been meeting together to discern what we believe God is saying to the church. We are accompanied in this process by 12 people, again representing the diverse lived experiences and convictions, who provided a non-episcopal, in a sense, what we're really saying, they weren't bishops, and they provided their perspective and held us to account in that process. And we are very grateful for what they offered to us, recognising that for some it also cost them. Together, the bishops have studied the scriptures, we have paid attention to the church tradition, and we have listened to wider society, as well as the voices of our sister churches in the Anglican Communion and our ecumenical partners. Above all, we have sought the wisdom of the Holy Spirit in prayer and worship. The differences within the Church of England are also present among the bishops of the Church of England. Engaging with Living in Love and Faith process has enabled us to become more open and honest with each other. That has been an important part of the process, which means, and I think has given us a greater understanding of what it means to be living together as members of the body of Christ. Being honest has not erased our disagreements. but it has deepened our relationship and our desire to continue to work with one another, seeking the deeper unity for the church for which Christ prayed for. Some clear developments have emerged from our discussions that in fact are a series of firsts for the Church of England. In an open letter, we together apologise for the pain, hostility, exclusion and rejection that LGBTQI people have experienced within the church. We realise that this behaviour has not reflected the universal love of God for all people. We know that we need to change. And Archbishop Stephen will speak more on this shortly. In our letter, because we write a letter to the church, we express our joyful affirmation and celebration of LGBTQI people in our church communities. And we have begun to produce a suite of prayers. These prayers are known as prayers of love and faith. They mean that same-sex couples who are faithful and seek a lifelong relationship will be able to come into churches in the Church of England for prayers of dedication, thanksgiving, and of God's blessing after, for example, coming to a significant point of their relationship or entering a civil partnership or marriage. For the first time, the churches within the Church of England will be able to do this. This is a real first. Up until now, same-sex couples have had no way of publicly expressing their desire to put God at the centre of their relationship and commitment to one another in a Church of England church. These prayers can be used flexibly for relationships at different stages and in different contexts. Services that use these prayers are not marriage services, and their use by clergy is entirely voluntary. This means that the church can continue to embrace the different perspectives that are held by clergy and congregations within the Church of England about same-sex marriage and same-sex relationships. We realise that for some this will be deeply disappointing, particularly for those who long for equal marriage for same-sex couple. We also realise that for others among us, there will be a deep concern that the prayers of love and faith will go too far. Your consciences and theological convictions will not allow you to use them. Any discussion around identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage involve deeply held convictions across the spectrum of lived experiences and theological understanding. People's personal identities and interpretation of scriptures are caught up in this process. It is inevitable that from a wide range of perspectives, there will be many feelings, which may include vulnerability, fear, sadness, resignation, anger, as well as joy and hope. Along with this, we live in a society in which we often are pressured towards adversarial behaviour. As God's church, we are called to a different way. By being honest about our own disagreements and through gracious interpretation of doctrine, we will honour the reality of our differences within the Church of England and across the Anglican Union and among our ecumenical partners. We hope to model this by providing prayers that bear a nuance of variety and of understanding. This is not about enforcing unity, but it is about pursuing it by the grace of God. What we must do is create gracious space for the Holy Spirit to fill as we stay faithful to Jesus Christ, rooted and grounded in the love of God. Thank you. I'm now going to pass it over to Ava, who will talk more about the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Sarah, and thank you for your interest and for coming today. It has been, I must say, my privilege to serve the Living in Love and Faith process over the last 5 or so years. So, what has changed? What's different now? What will it look like for LGBTQI plus people and for churches around the country? We have published a draft set of prayers of love and faith. These resources contain prayers, Bible readings, and other resources that can be used within a service that celebrates a committed relationship between two people. So a same-sex couple who may have entered a civil partnership or marriage will have a conversation with a clergy person. Together, they will look at the resources in the prayers of love and faith and create a personalized service in which they can celebrate their relationship, give thanks to God, and receive prayers of God's blessing on them. The prayers here in these resources include a prayer of dedication, for example, of commitment, of thanksgiving for the gift of love, and for God's blessing on a couple. They include prayers that may be said with or by the couple. The resource also suggests suitable Bible readings and gives some examples of how a service using these prayers might be put together so that it is truly personalized for the couple. A service could, in fact, include a prayer as a couple make their home together. So this is a major change for the Church of England, and our hope is that it will enable the Church, together with the family and friends of the couple, to joyfully affirm and celebrate their love and their commitment and faithfulness to one another before God. But living in love and faith is about much more than same-sex relationships. Its strapline is human identity, sexuality, relationships, and marriage. So as important as the question of same-sex relationships is, and it is important, a number of other things have been put forward by the bishops. So, for example, they have announced their plan to create a new suite of pastoral guidance that will replace guidance that is no longer fit for purpose, called Issues in Human Sexuality, written over 30 years ago. This guidance will help churches to better carry out their responsibility to offer pastoral care to all people in their parishes in a genuinely inclusive way. It will also help the Church in its discernment and expectations of people who might be wishing to explore a ministerial vocation in the Church. One of the aims of the Living in Love and Faith project was to enable the Church to better live out its calling in the context of a 21st century understanding of being human and being sexual. Both the Church and wider society are faced with new challenges that concern human identity and relationships. These include, for example, our need to reflect on what it means to be embodied human beings in an increasingly virtual world, and in a world where the concept of gender, for example, has become fluid. We also live in a society with a growing number of single people, both young and old. Human beings are created to be in relationship. Relationships are the stuff of everyday human life and flourishing. So how do we express and enact genuine welcome and acceptance that enables the flourishing of the diversity of people and relationships that form the everyday lives of people in our communities? That is what the Church is called to. So how do we speak into this, the wisdom of Christian understanding and of God's goodwill to all people? These are some of the areas that bishops agree the Church needs to attend to in an exploratory, participatory, and inclusive way. So much has happened, but much work still to do.
Press conference, but I would now like to ask Archbishop Justin for his personal reflections.
Just to put this slightly into historical context, questions around sexuality, relationships, and marriage have been debated by all global churches for a very long time, certainly 40 or 50 years. In the Church of England, we've been looking seriously at this, and there have been resolutions at General Synod and papers and discussions since the 1970s. But that has picked up a lot in the last 10 years as culture has changed very rapidly in our society. And I really want to say these are not academic debates or theological debates. As Eva and Sarah have commented, this is about the lived experience of normal human beings every day with those they love and who love them, and working out how to do that. What works, what's right and wrong. And very often, and Archbishop Stephen will say something about this in a moment, very often the way the church has responded has been negative and harmful. The Living in Love and Faith, the LLF project, also hasn't been about people. It's been with people. And that's probably the biggest change in our working methods. In 2017, a paper was brought to the General Synod, which the Synod rejected. And rather than bring yet another series of small papers, we sat down and worked, as Sarah has already described, on a process which led to this book. I commend it very strongly to you. It's very light reading compared to what it might be. And in the process of producing this work, it started with a couple of years of deep theological thinking from people of all views and very different experiences of sexuality. It went on to 2 years in which the streams of thinking, which were biblical, philosophical, ethical, historical, and scientific about the psychological and biological sciences, in which those streams were mixed up and produced in the end this work. And within those streams, and when those who did this work were people who were lay and ordained, people who were gay and straight, people who fell in every single category. So it was done with people, not to them. And there's been a really deep listening, and you'll find many stories in here. It's got lots of good stories about different people's experience. And that resulted in the book being published, discussions at the General Synod, and Sarah very kindly, in addition to her other duties as Bishop of London, with Ava, who's worked the whole way through, working for 2.5 years on what we did about it. So not just producing a resource, but saying, okay, how are we going to act on this? It's been the most extensive and in-depth effort of any major faith group in exploring these questions, and many other global churches are looking on this as a major resource. It's a very high quality resource. We've also broadened those who are involved in making the decision. Historically, when I first became bishop 10 years ago, everything was done by the senior bishops, and everyone else was told what had been decided. And they did agree with it, didn't they? And it's now, this last discussion over the last 2.5 years involved what's called the College of Bishops, which is every bishop. And on Tuesday, when we met at the Excel Centre, there were over 100 bishops in the room, and it was a gracious, passionate, robust, but immensely united discussion, which resulted in an overwhelming majority for the direction in which we're going at the moment. It's the first time the entire college has been involved historically ever in making these kinds of decisions. And it's brought us together, as Sarah said, and Ava, huge honesty, transparency, and friendship and love. And I hope and pray that as we go from here to the General Synod next month, that the vast majority of voices will have that similar concern for each other. As it happened, I had a meeting last night with about 50 people from all shades of opinion within the church, and we were discussing this at some length. It was a supper, and everyone was listening carefully to each other. It wasn't a single discussion. Everybody was talking, and the mood was extraordinarily positive. This is a moment of joy and celebration. We have actually made decisions, and they are decisions which change our approach to LGBTQI+ people. We also say in these papers and the press release in particular that we're divided. And there's no point in pretending otherwise. The Church of England and the Anglican Communion are very divided. Those of you who followed the Lambeth Conference in July, August, will remember that. And that brings me to my own position on this. The Anglican Communion is a communion, not a single church. It's 43 churches around the world in 165 countries with over 2,000 languages and cultures. We scarcely agree on anything in daily life and experience, apart from that God in his love and grace came as fully human without losing any of being God, in order to reach out to every human being, whatever their sexuality or color or race or gender or capacity or incapacity, to reach out to them and to draw them into the experience of God's love. That's the message of the church, and to live in communities that reflect that love and that difference. When a communion has people who range from someone I met a few years back, whose grandfather in the hills of Papua New Guinea was the first man of his ethnic group ever to see a wheel, through to people who have advanced PhDs from top universities in the United States and work on Wall Street. You know, are we going to agree on everything? Dream on. Totally different life experiences. The Anglican Communion's miracle is not that it has differences, but that it loves one another despite them. That's extraordinary. It's a sign of God's grace and goodness. And my role as Archbishop of Canterbury is nowhere described as a human being, which may not surprise many people, but is described as an instrument of communion and a focus of unity. I have a pastoral responsibility for the whole communion. I've often prayed and will continue to pray with all sorts and kinds of people, with all sorts and kinds of problems, including many people who came looking for the experience of God's love, who were gay or who were straight or who had trouble with their marriage or were worried about their relationships. And I'll continue to pray for all those who come seeking prayer, and to pray with love and a deep sense that most clergy have of the privilege of being allowed into these sacred parts of people's lives. But because of my pastoral care and responsibility in being a focus of unity for the whole communion, I will, while being extremely joyfully celebratory of these new resources, I will not personally use them, in order not to compromise that pastoral care, for example, which will need to be exercised next week when the Pope and the moderator of the Church of Scotland and I go on a pilgrimage of peace to the South Sudan, where 500,000 people have died from civil war in the last 9 years. And that is a self-denying ordinance, but it comes out of the global responsibility. So in summary, it's a long journey. I'm sure the last word hasn't been said, and I'm sure the discussions will continue. But this is an enormously important point, not only within the Anglican Communion and the Church of England, but also across the global church, in which we seek to recognize and to celebrate the love that all people have for one another, regardless of who they are and where they're from. And I am filled with joy about that. And last night, with all those differences, people shared their views and their feelings, which were almost all positive, with great joy that we'd taken this step.
Thank you very much, Archbishop Justin. I'm now going to call on Archbishop Stephen for his own personal reflections, and to let you know that Ava will be circling back with a practical explanation of what will be happening at Synod and how these materials are going to be.
Yeah, so it may be a long journey, but you're almost on the last lap of the presentations, and you'll get a chance to ask questions. And I thought I'd just start by saying, since Tuesday, I spoke with a priest yesterday, day before, in the York Diocese where I serve, and she said when I not so much heard the news, when I digested the news, when I kind of understood what's really being offered here, she said I wept, and I said I wasn't quite sure how to interpret her tears. I thought, is it because you're so distressed by what has happened or what hasn't happened? And she said, no. She said, but could I just check out, does it mean that if there's a same-sex couple in my parish who get married, does it mean I can invite them to church, that we can acknowledge? I said, yeah, that's what it means. So they were tears of joy. Now, I know that's not where everybody is. But I think I want to emphasize this does put the Church of England in a new place. And I believe it's a good place. And it's a good place because it holds the unity of the church, but it also enables LGBTQI plus people to be part of that church and have their lived experience, their love for each other acknowledged in the church. And I'm really sorry. One thing we've learnt in this process is just how much damage we've done. I don't think we didn't mean to do it. Nobody gets up in the morning saying they want to hurt and damage people, but we have. And I also know that saying sorry doesn't cut it for some people. It sounds hollow. It's all very well you saying sorry. The church still isn't giving us what we want. That is how some people are responding. And I want to say, yeah, I do get that, but it doesn't mean the sorry isn't still heartfelt. And also the sorry now is coming from a place of being informed. We've spent so much time listening and working with people across a whole range of diversities. It has brought us to a new knowledge and a new place of humility before God, before church, before the world, where we can say, yes, we got it wrong. And we're not saying, by the way, we think we've got it right now, but we are saying this is a good place to be. Where we can live together with our disagreements and fully acknowledge and welcome into the church LGBTQI plus people. And the other thing I want to say sorry for is, I'm not getting at the journalists. We love you as well, but we're really sorry the news leaked. We're really sorry the news leaked because it meant that the people who would be hurt most by the news, those who are most vulnerable, heard the story not in the way that we want to tell the story. And we're really sorry that happened. So let me finish with a story which perhaps helps make sense of the change that's happening because of what we're announcing today. So I have a dear friend, one of my dearest, oldest, closest friends. He died 2 years ago in the opening months of the COVID thing. He was a priest. He was in a long-term, lifelong, stable, committed relationship with another priest that they met at theological college, and they were in a lifelong partnership. When civil partnership came in 15, 20 years ago, whenever that came in, they entered into a civil partnership, faithfully following the rules and disciplines of the church, and entered into a civil partnership. They invited me to the civil partnership ceremony. These are some of my closest friends. I was delighted to go. rather naughtily, they tried to smuggle into the service a reading from the Bible, which, as you may know, in the civil partnership legislation, no prayers, no readings from the Bible were allowed. They tried to smuggle one in. They chose that passage from the Song of Songs, beautiful passage. Many waters cannot quench love, neither can the floods drown it. And I kind of hope, because it didn't specifically mention God or Jesus, the civil celebrant wouldn't notice it was from the Bible. Civil celebrant did notice it was from the Bible. There's a whole little bit of wrangling going on before the ceremony began. They had to remove it. And I sat there, and I was heartbroken that here these people who love each other, whose relationship so exhibits all that I would want and expect from a relationship, who taught me so much about love and sacrifice, and they couldn't even have this little reading from the Bible. And much of that was down to us in the church because of what we'd asked the government to do, and there was a great party afterwards, and the party was in the garden of the church, where one of them was the minister. So we're standing in the garden of the church. There's the church. We're celebrating their marriage in the garden. We couldn't go into the church. We couldn't even go into the church and say a prayer. Don't misunderstand what's happening today. All that changes. And I'm really pleased it's changing. I'm really pleased it's changing. For my, gay friends, I'm really pleased. And no, it's not enough for some. And I'm really sorry it's not enough. And I wasn't expecting to get emotional. But I am. Because I think it puts the Church of England in a better place. And I really hope that we can hold together our unity. And I cry out for those who hate what we're doing and say, we want to hold you together in this. But this is the fullest pastoral provision that we can offer at the moment without changing legislation, which would take years anyway, years and years. We can offer this soon, and I thank God for it, and I hope it will be well received in our church and in our world.
Harry Farley from BBC News. You mentioned there was a range of views in the House of Bishops on that question. Perhaps Archbishop Stephen and Bishop Sarah, could I just ask for your personal views? Do you think that gay sex in the context of a loving, committed, lifelong relationship is a sin?
I think, as Bishop Sarah's just said, if people who have, as I imagine this going forward, if people who have entered into a same-sex civil marriage come to the church seeking one of these services of love and faith, in the same way that actually with heterosexual couples, who come seeking holy matrimony, and one notices they have the same address, for instance, when they fill in the forms, I don't ask them questions about. I celebrate the fact that they are wanting to commit themselves in a stable, loving relationship. I believe the great gift of sexual and physical intimacy to be cherished belongs in stable, loving, committed relationships. And therefore, I will celebrate the fact that people are living that way and expressing their intimacy that way.
Press Association. Given the census figures on the decline of religious belief in this country the other month, what do you say to those who would say that this is a pretty desperate attempt to appear more relevant to secular society, while also, in a way, engaging with those who hold the orthodox position on human sexuality?
I think there's a lot that we need to learn from the data that we see, both about the declining in people identifying as religious, as well as where we've seen decline within the church. And I think that we have to take that seriously. Often I recognise that is patchy. There are some churches that are growing, and that would be true with it. The London Diocese holds its own, if not grows. I think that in London, I think that people may actually be they make a greater commitment now to be part of a church than they had previously. I see, I confirm huge numbers of people who want to make a decision to follow Jesus Christ. So actually, I think those figures we have to pay attention and look at. And also, I think that people tend to be spiritual, although not always belong. So there's a real data that I wouldn't underplay the need for us to reflect on them, but also to recognise where the church is in contact with people. This has been a process where we have been, as a church, listening to people's lived experience. We have been reading scripture. We have been very aware of our tradition. And in a sense, that is what we have been reflecting on, not necessarily the question of relevance to our society. That isn't. Of course, we are part of, there is a church in every single community. We are the established church. So therefore, part of our listening has been to those around us. But it's not about relevance. It has been about trying to discern what God is calling us to do. And I think we recognise that within the church, there is a diversity of view, as there is within the College of Bishops. And I think what we're saying is recognising that diversity. This is our response that we are making to that living in love and faith. And I do think that one of the things for me about a first, there's always been difference in the College of Bishops, but this is a first in probably saying, well, actually there is a difference. And actually our response was overwhelmingly a majority to put this proposal. This is our response forward. And therefore we are saying that with our diversity, we are seeking to walk in unity, which it isn't about forcing it, but about saying with the grace of God, we will continue to do that.